Elizabeth, the murderess of the 1950s. In 1943, in a small town in Western Europe, a farmer named Richard Miller traveled to the weekly market to buy supplies for his work. While wandering through the stalls, his attention was caught by a beautiful young woman named Elizabeth Krauss, who was selling cotton alongside a younger man named Thomas Krauss, who turned out to be her younger brother. After returning to his village, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Elizabeth. For a time, he decided to propose to her. She agreed to marry him on one condition, that her younger brother would live with them, as she was his sole guardian after their parents passed away. Richard accepted, and soon they were married and moved into his rural home, new life together. Years passed, and the couple had 2 children. Thomas worked alongside Richard in the fields, while Elizabeth took up sewing to help improve their income. On the outside, their life seemed peaceful and stable, but the reality was far darker. Betrayal and sinister plans. Throughout her marriage, Elizabeth was unfaithful to Richard, engaging in multiple secret affairs with men from the village. Rumors began to spread, and eventually Richard started to hear whispers about his wife's actions. Initially unsure, he decided to observe her closely. He noticed unusual behavior. Her home was frequently messy, as if someone else had been there, and she always had more money than she earned from sewing. After confronting her several times, Elizabeth realized that Richard would not stop investigating her. To avoid any further problems, she made a horrifying decision. She had to get rid of him. At first, she attempted to poison him, but he miraculously survived multiple times. When her poisoning attempts failed, she devised a new plan. One night while Richard was asleep, she poured a flammable liquid over his bed and set the house on fire. But once again, fate intervened. Neighbors saw the flames and rushed to save him. Richard barely survived, suffering severe burns. Escaped to a new town. After this final attempt on his life, Richard could no longer endure living with Elizabeth. He went to the village mayor and revealed everything. The mayor forced Elizabeth to leave the village immediately, warning her that legal action would be taken if she refused. She took her children and her brother and moved to a nearby town called Schaltenberg, where she started a new life. Elizabeth bought a small house and rented out one of the rooms to young men in the area. Before long, she resumed her old ways, engaging in relationships with the tenants, and her reputation quickly became a topic of gossip once again. Conflict with her brother. As time passed, Thomas became increasingly disturbed by her behavior. He tried to reason with her, urging her to stop and focus on raising her children. However, Elizabeth ignored his pleas. Frustrated, Thomas returned to their former village and sought help from their relatives. He told them everything and convinced them to intervene. 2 of their uncles traveled to Schaltenberg and confronted Elizabeth, demanding that she leave town and return with them. She assured them that she would, but she needed a few days to settle her affairs first. Horrific murder. That night after Thomas went to sleep, Elizabeth carried out her final and most horrifying crime. She took a sharp object and struck him repeatedly on the head until he was dead. She then removed his clothes, dug a hole beneath her bed, and buried his body. For 15 days, Thomas lay decomposing under her bed, while Elizabeth carried on with her life as if nothing had happened. Discovery of the crime. After a few days, neighbors began to notice a terrible smell coming from her house. When they questioned her, she made up various excuses, claiming that some animals had died and were causing the stench. To make her lies more convincing, she even placed dead poultry on her rooftop for people to see. However, the smell grew worse. Eventually, a neighbor reported the situation to the village mayor, expressing suspicions about Thomas's sudden disappearance. The mayor decided to investigate. Upon entering the house, the stench was overwhelming. When they searched for the source, they discovered it was coming from beneath Elizabeth's bed. Digging under the floor, they uncovered the decayed remains of a man with visible head wounds. After further searching, they found his blood-stained clothes hidden in the oven. Child's testimony. As officials searched the house, they noticed Elizabeth's 6-year-old son trembling in fear. When they comforted him and asked him what had happened, he finally broke his silence and revealed the horrifying truth. The man under the bed was his Uncle Thomas, and his mother had murdered him in front of him and his sister. Elizabeth had threatened her children, warning them that if they ever spoke about what happened, they would end up buried just like their uncle. Justice is served. Elizabeth was immediately arrested. Her trial lasted several months, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. She was sentenced to death, bringing an end to her reign of terror. She became infamously known in the press as the Murderess of the 1950s, leaving behind a story so gruesome that it would be remembered for generations.